My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 34 years old. And for almost a decade, I've taught chemistry at Lincoln High School in Portland. I never became rich doing it. Never drove a luxury car. Never posted photos from tropical vacations. But I loved my work. I loved watching students finally understand something they thought was impossible. And for most of the last 3.5 years, I thought I had something else I loved too. His name was Ethan Parker. He was 32. Ambitious. Handsome. Successful. And the man I genuinely believed I would spend the rest of my life with. At least that's what I believed before everything fell apart. Before the hospital hallway. Before the silence. Before I learned what people are really made of. When life stops being easy. 8 months earlier. My mother, Margaret Bennett, had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctor didn't try to soften it. Maybe a year, possibly less. I remember sitting beside her in that sterile consultation room, staring at the floor while she calmly asked questions about treatment options. The doctor was talking. My mother was listening. And I was breaking apart. She was all I had. My father left when I was 6 years old. One day he was there. The next he wasn't. No dramatic goodbye. No explanation. Just gone. My mother raised me alone. Worked 2 jobs when she had to. Skipped meals when money got tight. Stayed awake helping me finish science projects, even when she had to wake up before dawn for work. Everything good about me came from her. Everything. So when she got sick, there was never a decision to make. I took family leave from school, packed my apartment, moved back into my childhood home, and became her caregiver. The days blended together. Doctor appointments, chemotherapy sessions, medication schedules, emergency room visits, nights sitting beside her bed, listening to her breathe. Sometimes I'd wake up in a chair with a blanket over me and realize she had covered me while I slept, despite being the one dying. That's who my mother was. Even as cancer consumed her body, she worried about everyone else. At first, Ethan seemed supportive. He visited after work, brought dinner, sat with Mom in the living room, made jokes to keep her smiling. Sometimes I'd catch my mother watching him and smiling at me afterward. The kind of smile mothers give when they're already imagining wedding photos. Back then, I imagined them too. Then, things started changing. Gradually, almost invisibly, the visits became less frequent. His texts became shorter. Work suddenly required more late nights. More business dinners. More travel. Every time I asked if something was wrong, he'd kiss my forehead and tell me he was just stressed. And every time I believed him, because I wanted to, because I was exhausted, because focusing on my dying mother already consumed every ounce of emotional energy I had. Looking back now, the signs seem obvious. But grief makes you blind. You stop noticing what's happening around you because you're too busy trying to stop your world from collapsing. Then came that Tuesday night, the night everything changed. Mom had taken a sudden turn. High fever, severe dehydration. She couldn't keep food down. The doctors admitted her immediately. I arrived at the hospital before sunrise. By 11 that night, I had barely moved from the chair beside her bed. The doctors had started using phrases I hated. Comfort, care, quality of life, preparing for outcomes. Words that sounded professional, but really meant one thing. Time was running out. Mom was sleeping when I stepped into the hallway for coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and stale air. I was halfway to the vending machine when I saw him, Ethan, standing near the window. Perfect hair, perfect clothes. Not a wrinkle anywhere, like he'd spent an hour getting ready before coming. For a second, relief washed through me. Maybe he'd finally realized I needed him. Maybe he came because he cared. Maybe. Claire. His voice sounded strange, careful, practiced. My stomach immediately tightened. Hey, I said quietly. What are you doing here? He swallowed. We need to talk. The words hit me like ice water. Not because I knew exactly what was coming, because some part of me did. The part that had been ignoring warning signs for months. The part that knew people don't show up to hospitals at 11 o'clock at night to have good conversations. I glanced toward my mother's room. She was still asleep, machines blinking steadily beside her bed. Now I asked, seriously. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. I've been trying to find the right time. There is no right time. I know. He looked away. Then he took a breath. The kind people take before they hurt someone. And suddenly I knew. Every nerve in my body knew. I can't do this anymore. Claire. The hallway seemed to become impossibly quiet. I can't keep putting my life on hold. I stared at him, not understanding, or maybe refusing to understand. Then he said the rest, waiting for this to be over. For a moment, I actually thought I'd misheard him, because surely nobody would say that. Not here. Not outside a hospital room where someone's mother was dying. Not to someone they claimed to love. But he did. And he meant it. Waiting for this to be over. My voice barely sounded like mine. Ethan's face tightened. You know what I mean. No. I said softly. I really don't think I do. He looked toward my mother's room. Then back at me. Like he was annoyed that death had chosen such inconvenient timing. I care about you. Claire. I do. But your whole life has become your mother. Every conversation. Every plan. Every weekend. I feel like I'm standing outside your life waiting for you to come back. My mother is dying. I know. No. Ethan. I don't think you do. His jaw flexed. I have needs too. That sentence should have made me angry. Maybe another version of me would have screamed. But I was too tired. Too hollow. Too full of hospital coffee, and dread and sleepless nights. So I just stood there, looking at the man I thought I knew, and felt something inside me quietly disconnect. He kept talking. Something about loneliness. Something about wanting a future. Something about how he couldn't keep sacrificing himself for a relationship where I was never emotionally available anymore. I remember the movement of his mouth, more than the words, because all I could hear was one sentence repeating inside my skull, waiting for this to be over. This, my mother, her pain, her last breaths, her life. He had reduced the woman who raised me to an obstacle. Finally, I said, okay. He blinked. Okay, yes. That's it. What do you want me to say? I thought we could talk about this. You came to a hospital where my mother is dying, to tell me you're tired of waiting for her death to stop inconveniencing your life. His face paled. That's not fair. No. I said, it's accurate. For the first time. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, like hearing his own cruelty repeated back to him made it harder to hide behind polished words. I stepped back. I'm done. Ethan. Claire. No. Go home. Then I turned around and walked back into my mother's room. I didn't slam a door. Didn't cry. Didn't beg. I sat beside her bed and took her hand. She was still sleeping. Fragile. Warm. Alive. I deleted Ethan's number. Blocked him everywhere. Then I sat there until morning, while the machines kept beeping, and my mother kept breathing. She never knew what had happened outside her door, and I was grateful for that. 4 days later, I was back at my mother's house at 2 a.m. Unable to sleep. The hospice nurse had warned me it could be any day, maybe hours. I kept waiting for grief to make room for anger, but it never came. I felt numb, like my heart had gone into emergency shutdown. Maybe I had already spent every emotion I had watching my mother fade away. Maybe Ethan had simply chosen the one moment when there was nothing left in me to break. He never reached out. No apology. No message from a friend's phone. No email. Nothing. He walked away exactly as easily as my father had. And that, more than anything, told me who he was. 3 weeks later, my mother died. Monday morning. 47 a.m. I know the exact time because I was holding her hand when it happened. One moment she was there, the next she wasn't. People always talk about dramatic final words, life-changing speeches, profound goodbyes. That wasn't how it happened. Mom was tired. So incredibly tired. She squeezed my hand once, looked at me, smiled, and whispered, "You'll be okay, sweetheart." Then she closed her eyes. A few minutes later, she was gone. The room became impossibly quiet. Not literally. Machines still hummed. Nurses still moved through the hallway. Life continued. But my world stopped. I had spent 8 months preparing for that moment. And I still wasn't prepared. The funeral was that Friday. Somehow, I got through it. I still don't know how. Maybe grief creates autopilot. Maybe the human brain knows how to survive things. The heart can't. Friends came. Former students came. Teachers from Mom's school came. Neighbors she'd known for decades came. People told stories. People cried. People hugged me. The whole day felt like watching someone else's life through a fogged-up window. But there was one thing I kept noticing. Or rather, one person. Someone who wasn't there. Ethan. I kept finding myself looking toward the entrance. Not because I wanted him there, not because I missed him, but because after 3.5 years together, after all the dinners he shared with my mother, after all the birthdays and holidays and memories, basic human decency suggested he would at least show up, or send flowers, or write a card, or acknowledge that the woman who treated him like family had died. Nothing. Not a single word. Not a single flower. Not a single text. Complete silence. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who claimed I wasn't emotionally available couldn't even spare 30 seconds to express condolences. If I had needed confirmation that ending things was the right decision, he gave it to me. My best friend Nadia Hassan became my lifeline during those weeks. Nadia was one of those rare people who showed up without making everything about themselves. She screened calls, brought groceries, made sure I ate actual food. When I forgot to drink water, she literally handed me bottles and stood there until I finished them. Don't think about Ethan, she kept saying. Just survive this week. Then the next week. Then the week after that, one day at a time. The funeral ended. The guests left. The casseroles stopped arriving, and reality settled in. I was alone. At least that's what I thought. A few days later, my mother's attorney called. He wanted to schedule a meeting regarding her estate. I assumed it would be straightforward. The house. A modest savings account. Maybe some retirement funds. My mother had been a teacher her entire life. Teachers don't usually leave behind fortunes. I wasn't thinking about money anyway. You don't lose the most important person in your life and immediately start wondering about bank accounts. So the following Monday, I walked into the lawyer's office expecting paperwork. What I got instead felt like stepping into an alternate universe. The attorney opened a folder, adjusted his glasses, and began reading numbers. At first, I thought I'd misunderstood. Then I thought he'd confused me with another client. Then I thought maybe I was having some kind of stress-induced breakdown. Because none of it made sense. $2.8 million. Investment portfolios. Trust accounts. Property holdings. Corporate shares. A 28% ownership stake in a technology company called Tech Vista Solutions. And a permanent seat on its board of directors. I stared at him, then laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was insane. You're joking. I'm not. This can't be right. He slid documents across the table. Everything was there. Signatures. Records. Legal filings. All legitimate. All mine. For nearly 2 hours. He explained a secret my mother had carried for years. My Uncle James. Her older brother. The uncle I barely saw growing up. The uncle who always seemed busy. The uncle who died in 2019. He hadn't simply been successful. He'd been extraordinarily wealthy. Years earlier, he founded Tech Vista Solutions, a small startup that eventually exploded into one of the most valuable mid-sized technology companies in the region. When he died, he left everything to my mother. Everything. And my mother never told me. Not once. Not even a hint. She continued teaching. Continued living in the same modest house. Continued driving an old Honda. Continued clipping coupons. Continued pretending nothing had changed. According to the attorney, she believed wealth should never become a shortcut. She wanted me to build my own life. My own career. My own character. She planned to tell me someday. When I was older. When I had children of my own. When the timing felt right. Cancer took that choice away from her. When the meeting finally ended, I walked outside feeling dizzy. The world looked different. The same streets. The same buildings. The same sky. But somehow none of it felt real anymore. Nadia picked me up because I wasn't capable of driving. When I climbed into her car, she took one look at my face and immediately pulled into a parking lot. What happened? I handed her the paperwork. 5 minutes later, she was staring at me. Exactly the way I'd stared at the attorney. That night, we sat in her apartment eating pizza and trying to process the fact that my entire understanding of my life had just been rewritten. I thought the surprises were over. They weren't. 3 days later, Nadia was scrolling through Instagram when she suddenly froze. That was never a good sign. What? Nothing. Nadia. She sighed. You don't need to see this. Which immediately guaranteed that I would. She handed me her phone. The photo showed a fancy restaurant downtown. Crystal glasses. Expensive wine. Designer clothes. The kind of place I could never justify visiting on a teacher's salary. At the center of the picture sat Ethan, smiling, looking happier than I'd seen him in months. Beside him sat a man named Brandon Caldwell. Handsome, well-dressed, successful. The caption beneath the photo made my stomach twist. When your guy finally finds his upgrade? The post had been uploaded the day after my mother's funeral. The day after, I zoomed in on Brandon's profile. Vice President of Sales, Executive Leadership, 6-figure salary, luxury vacations, private conferences, designer watches. Everything Ethan always seemed impressed by. Everything I wasn't. And suddenly, the entire puzzle snapped into place. Ethan hadn't left because my mother was sick. He hadn't left because our relationship became difficult. He hadn't left because he felt neglected. He left because he believed he'd found someone better, someone wealthier, someone more important, someone who could offer him a shinier future. The hospital hallway wasn't about heartbreak. It was about timing. He needed an exit strategy, and my mother's illness gave him one. I handed the phone back to Nadia. She watched me carefully. Are you okay? Oddly enough, I was not happy, not healed, but clear. For the first time in months, everything made sense. Block them. What? Everyone connected to Ethan. She nodded immediately. No questions asked. Then, as I stared out the apartment window, a memory surfaced from the lawyer's office. A single detail I hadn't mentioned to anyone, not even Nadia. While reviewing TechVista's executive directory, I'd noticed a familiar name, Brandon Caldwell, Vice President of Sales, a senior executive at the company where I now owned 28%, the company whose board I now sat on, the company that technically belonged, in part, to me. A strange smile touched my lips, not because I wanted revenge, not because I planned to do anything, but because life had suddenly become far more interesting than Ethan could possibly imagine, and neither he nor Brandon had any idea. 6 weeks later, life had become a strange combination of grief, legal paperwork, and unexpected responsibility. Every day seemed divided into two worlds. In one world, I was still mourning my mother, packing boxes, sorting photographs, finding handwritten notes tucked into recipe books, discovering little pieces of her everywhere. In the other world, I was suddenly a major shareholder in a technology company worth millions. Board packets arrived in my email. Executives requested meetings. Financial reports filled my weekends. It felt absurd. 1 month earlier, my biggest concern had been making sure Mom took her medication on time. Now people were asking for my opinions on corporate strategy. Then the messages started. At first, I didn't realize what had triggered them. 1 blocked call notification. Then 3. Then 7. All from different numbers. The first text arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Claire, I just heard about your mom. I'm so sorry. Can we please talk? Ethan. I stared at the screen for a moment, then locked my phone. No response. A few hours later, another message appeared. Please. I know you're angry. Still nothing. The next day, there were 4 more, then 6, then 10. By the end of the week, my phone looked like someone was conducting a harassment campaign. Only it wasn't harassment. It was panic. I could practically feel it through the screen. Nadia eventually figured out what happened. Word about the inheritance had spread. Not publicly. Not in newspapers. But through lawyers, executives, investors, professional networks. The kind of information that travels quietly but travels fast. Apparently, someone had mentioned that the daughter of TechVista's founder's sister had inherited a massive ownership stake. Then someone connected the dots. Then someone else recognized my name. And eventually, that information reached Ethan. Suddenly, the man who had vanished without a trace wanted desperately to reconnect. What a coincidence. I read every message. Every single one. I never answered. One night, while Nadia and I were eating takeout on her couch, she glanced at my phone. 23 texts today. I know. You're not even curious. I shrugged. I already know what they say. You haven't read all of them. No. But they're all versions of the same sentence. What sentence? I looked at her. I'm sorry now that my decision has consequences. Nadia laughed so hard, she nearly dropped her drink. A few days later, another layer of drama emerged. Through one of Nadia's friends who worked in tech, recruiting. Apparently, Brandon Caldwell had learned exactly who I was. And he was not handling it well. TechVista had been discussing company-wide restructuring, budget reductions, potential layoffs. Nothing unusual in the business world. Except, Brandon's department was under heavy review. And now, He had discovered that his boyfriend's ex-girlfriend was one of the largest shareholders in the company. A shareholder he might have helped hurt. A shareholder sitting on the board? A shareholder with influence? The irony was almost too ridiculous to believe. More messages arrived. Please. Claire, I know, I made mistakes. Can we just talk? I still care about you. I was scared. I panicked. I wasn't thinking clearly. Read. Ignored. Read. Ignored. Day after day. The silence became routine. Not revenge. Not punishment. Simply absence. The same absence Ethan had given me when my mother died. The first board meeting arrived shortly afterward. A virtual meeting. My laptop sat on the kitchen table, coffee beside me, nervous energy in my stomach. The CEO, Philippe Dor, opened with condolences regarding my mother's passing. Then the meeting moved into business. Revenue forecasts, expansion plans, department reports, and eventually Brandon's presentation. For the first time, I saw him live. He looked confident at first, until he noticed my name in the participant list. Then, something changed. His posture stiffened. His smile became strained. He kept glancing toward the screen. Toward me. Toward the shareholder he expected to hate him. Toward the woman his boyfriend had abandoned. I listened carefully. Asked questions. Reviewed numbers. Discussed projections. And treated Brandon exactly the same way I treated everyone else. Professionally. Respectfully. Impartially. I never mentioned Ethan. Never acknowledged our connection. Never gave Brandon any reason to fear me. By the end of the meeting, he looked more confused than relieved. As if my kindness somehow frightened him more than hostility would have, the messages continued. Week after week. Then Ethan escalated. One afternoon, while sorting boxes at my mother's house, I looked out the window and saw a familiar car parked across the street. My stomach tightened. Ethan. Waiting. Watching. Not approaching. Just sitting there. For nearly 2 hours. Eventually, he drove away. The next day he came back. And the day after that, I never walked outside. Never acknowledged him. Never gave him the confrontation he seemed desperate to have. Then came the handwritten letter. 5 pages. Delivered directly to my apartment. The envelope contained old photographs. Vacation pictures. Birthday pictures. Pictures of us smiling together. Pieces of a life that no longer existed. I read the first paragraph. Then stopped. Not because it hurt. Because it felt dishonest? The man writing those words wasn't the man who stood in that hospital hallway. He was writing as if history could be edited. As if regret could rewrite facts. I donated the photographs without looking through them. The next evening, another text appeared. You donated our memories. You didn't even look at them. Read. No response. Days later, Ethan's older sister called. I answered accidentally. The moment I heard her voice, I regretted it. Claire. Please. Her tone was exhausted. I know my brother messed up. I said nothing. He's falling apart. That's unfortunate. He loves you. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. He loved me. My voice remained calm. He left me while my mother was dying. Silence. He posted photos with someone else the day after her funeral. More silence. Finally, I said softly, please don't contact me again. Then I ended the call. By week 10, something unexpected happened. TechVista landed a major contract. An educational software partnership worth millions. Ironically, the connection came through someone I knew from my teaching career. The deal stabilized multiple departments, including Brandon's. His job was no longer at risk. Philip personally called to thank me. The company celebrated, executives relaxed, and Brandon's career survived. Because of me, the woman he expected to resent him, the woman Ethan expected to hate them both. The irony was almost poetic. Meanwhile, according to rumors filtering through professional circles, Ethan and Brandon's relationship was beginning to crack. Arguments, tension, distance. Apparently, Ethan spent so much time obsessing over me that Brandon finally noticed. One evening Nadia called. You want the latest gossip? Not really. Too bad. I laughed. Fine. She paused dramatically. Brandon apparently told Ethan he's emotionally unavailable. I nearly dropped my coffee. The exact accusation Ethan had once used against me. The exact justification he'd hidden behind when abandoning me. Life really did have a twisted sense of humor. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. No texts, no calls, no emails, no letters. Nothing. The silence arrived without warning. One day, my phone buzzed constantly. The next day, it didn't buzz at all. Weeks of desperation disappeared overnight. Nadia thought Ethan had finally given up. Others believed Brandon had forced him to stop. Maybe. Maybe not. Something about it felt unfinished. Like the final chapter hadn't been written yet. And deep down, I knew one thing. People don't go from obsession to silence without a reason. Whatever that reason was, I had a feeling I was about to find out. 14 weeks after the breakup. I was sitting in my new condominium overlooking downtown Portland. The walls were still mostly bare. Half the furniture hadn't arrived yet. Boxes remained stacked in corners. But for the first time in nearly a year, the space felt peaceful. Not empty, peaceful. There was a difference. I had sold my mother's house the previous month. Making that decision nearly broke me. Every room contained memories. Every hallway carried echoes of her voice. Every scratch on every wall told a story. But eventually I realized something important. The house wasn't my mother. It was just a place. The love remained. The lessons remained. The memories remained. Those belonged to me, not to a building. Therapy helped me understand that. I'd been attending twice a week for over a month. At first, I hated it. Talking about emotions felt unnatural. I'd spent my entire life handling problems alone. Ever since my father walked away, ever since I became the responsible one, the dependable one, the girl who never asked for help, but therapy forced me to confront things I'd spent years burying. The abandonment, the grief, the guilt, the loneliness, even my relationship with Ethan. One afternoon, my therapist asked a question that stayed with me. Why do you think you tolerated his emotional distance for so long? I immediately started explaining. Work stress. My mother's illness. Bad timing. Life circumstances. She listened quietly, then asked, or were you simply used to carrying relationships by yourself? That question hit harder than any breakup ever had. Because the answer was yes. For most of my life I'd been giving people the benefit of the doubt, carrying emotional weight they refused to carry, accepting less than I deserved because I was grateful they stayed. My father taught me abandonment. Ethan simply reinforced the lesson. The difference was that this time, I finally learned from it. I also used part of the inheritance to create something meaningful. The Margaret Bennett Scholarship Fund. $50,000 annually for students pursuing careers in education. The first award ceremony was scheduled for the following month. Every time I thought about it, I smiled. Mom had spent her life helping young people. Now she'd continue helping them long after she was gone. That mattered more than any inheritance. More than any board seat. More than any investment account. Meanwhile, Tech Vista continued thriving. I transitioned into a largely advisory role. The CEO, Philippe Torres, was exceptional. The company didn't need me micromanaging operations. It simply needed me protecting the values Uncle James built it on. Expansion plans moved forward. New markets opened. Revenue increased. And Brandon Caldwell received a promotion, vice president to senior vice president. Bigger salary, greater responsibility, a stronger future. Ironically, the educational contract I helped secure played a major role in making that promotion possible. Life has a strange sense of humor sometimes. Then came week 13. The message. An unknown number appeared on my phone. Normally, I would have ignored it. For some reason, I didn't. The text was brief. This is Brandon. I need you to know I ended things with Ethan. This has nothing to do with you or the company. He's been emotionally stuck on you since the day we met. I need someone who's actually present. I thought you should know, so there won't be any awkwardness professionally. I stared at the screen. Actually present. Those exact words. The same accusation Ethan had once thrown at me while I sat beside my dying mother. The same reasoning he used when abandoning me. Now, it had come back to him. Not from me. Not from fate. But from the man he chose over me. I sat quietly for several minutes. Then, blocked the number. No response. No come on. Nothing. The next evening, another message arrived. This time, from Ethan. I nearly deleted it immediately. Something stopped me. So I read it. And read. And read. The message went on for pages. A confession. An apology. A plea. He wrote about regret. About self-reflection. About realizing he'd traded something real for something superficial. About how he finally understood what love actually meant. About how watching Brandon walk away from him forced him to understand the pain he'd caused me. About how he now saw the hospital hallway differently. About how he wished he could go back and change everything. The final paragraph was the longest. He wrote that losing me was the greatest mistake of his life, that I was the person he should have chosen, that he would spend years regretting what he'd done. When I finished reading, I placed my phone face down on the table. Then, I made tea. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I wasn't. That surprised me. Months earlier, I would have cried. Months earlier, I would have questioned myself. Months earlier, I would have wondered whether people deserved second chances. Now I simply felt clarity. Therapy had taught me something important. Ethan wasn't sorry he left. He was sorry he left the wrong person. If Brandon had never broken up with him, I never would have received that message. If the inheritance never existed, he never would have contacted me. If Tech Vista wasn't successful, none of this would have happened. His apology wasn't born from conscience. It was born from consequences. That distinction mattered a lot. So I did exactly what I'd done with every other message. I closed it. I never responded. And I never would, because closure isn't something another person gives you. Closure is something you create for yourself. Mine had arrived the moment I accepted that Ethan's choices had nothing to do with my worth. Several weeks later, I found myself sitting in a cafe overlooking Auckland Harbor. A cup of coffee steamed beside me. The ocean sparkled under the afternoon sun. Tomorrow, I would fly to Iceland. The week before, I'd stood on top of the Sky Tower and jumped. Something my mother would have loved. Something that would have terrified her. Something she would have done anyway. That was who she was. Brave, despite fear. Not because fear was absent, because she refused to let it decide her life. The scholarship program launched successfully. 3 students received awards. One of them was the daughter of a single mother. Another planned to become a chemistry teacher. I cried reading her essay. Not because I was sad, because I knew my mother would have loved her. Nadia kept sending photos from home. Updates. Stories. Proof that life continued. One day she casually mentioned that Ethan had moved to Seattle. A fresh start. A new job. A different city. Good? I genuinely meant that. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate requires emotional investment. And I had none left to give Krana. Sometimes I still reread his final message. Not because I miss him. Not because I'm tempted to answer. But because it reminds me how far I've come. He hurt me. And I healed. He stayed trapped inside his regrets. That's not revenge. That's consequence. People often ask whether I feel guilty for never responding. The answer is simple. No. He wanted a conversation. An argument? Forgiveness. Anger. Anything. Something he could hold onto. Something he could use to ease his guilt. I gave him nothing. Because nothing was the truth. There was nothing left to say. Some people think silence is weakness. They're wrong. Sometimes, silence is the strongest answer you can give. Not because you're trying to punish someone, but because you've genuinely moved beyond them. The woman who sat in that hospital hallway months ago would never have believed she'd reached this point. She thought her world was ending. In reality, it was beginning. My mother used to say that life has a strange way of revealing people's character when things get difficult. She was right. Ethan revealed his, Brandon revealed his, and eventually, I revealed mine. Not through revenge. Not through power. Not through money. Through peace. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the harbor, I smiled and thought about my mother. Then I stood, picked up my suitcase, and walked toward the future. Without looking back,